So thank you everyone for joining this webinar. We are coming with yet another episode while I'm having a conversation with Ashok this time. Last time we had a conversation around the agile coaching nuances, and we had some of the very intrigued questions, and people felt that they they basically took a lot of out of it from that session. So we are continuing in that same spirit in this session as well. So welcome everybody, and welcome Ashok this time again.
Thank you, and thanks for having me, ShriKant.
So this time we are having a topic which generally everybody struggles with, even though it's not like people have not really talked about it. I'm talking about a topic which is about story slicing. Uh, Everybody keeps on talking about it, and but at the same time, everybody struggles with it, even after having so many cookbooks on how to slice the stories. And the problem is that there are reasons why we have all such problems, and that's the focus of this conversation this time. So before we basically talk about the story slicing, I think we can start with a simple idea. What is the difference between a story and a requirement from your standpoint?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you. This is a very important point, and it has been used interchangeably in this agile community, even now for a long time. So most of the places when I go and I tell them like, please do not use the word requirement and use the word story. So people say like, hey, what's the difference? Ultimately, what basically you're getting is some business needs, right? So call it a requirement, call it a story. How does it matter? So the words matter. Words are actions. The way you use the word in a place, in the workplace or outside, that really makes a difference. So words are not just words. Words are actions, right? So when you talk about the requirement, the first thing that comes to my mind is something is static, something that has been given, and that you have to go and do it. So that is the requirement, that it is the business requires you to do this. That's why it's called requirement. And that's how the entire world of, the classical methodology worked. Some requirement came from the top and it was given and you just go and implement it. So the word requirement in your mindset, in our mindset, comes with the notion that this is something to be done. It is not something to be developed, even though it develops to some extent. The story has a very different connotation. Just like a grandma's story, the story starts, or if you're watching the soap opera, you can see how the story evolves. The first, they see the whole serial for like 10 episodes, and gradually it becomes 200 episodes, right? And especially if you see that Ekta Kapoor serial, it goes on and on and on, right? And that is called a story. Story evolves. The story evolves in the sense like it starts somewhere, then you keep adding, and then gradually it evolves to an extent that you can say like, okay, now my story finishes. And you can add more to that, right? So a story has a life. And the life begins with the person who conceives like, this is the problem of a customer, and let's go and solve it. And they start with a placeholder. So many a time, the definition of the story they give is a placeholder to start discussion. So once you start a discussion, you do not go and solutionize right away. You work with the team, you understand it, then you come out with different solutions, then you create an hypothesis, and then you start solving one by one. And the story is not complete until it's done in the sprint and it's delivered to the customer. So the story has a whole life cycle, right? It's not a requirement cut and dried, like that's exactly what you have to do and just deliver. It is something that you keep overlapping with the business, with the customer, and keep learning and learning until it is actually delivered to the customer. So that's the fundamental difference between a story and. So it also changes your mindset, the way you look at it. And that's the reason I always insist on people to use the word story versus requirement.
So actually, when I think about uh, agile, then it just generally comes up with the idea of the collaboration and working together, and immediately the idea of conversation comes up. So I generally feel that story comes with the idea of having the conversation. So as long as as long as whatever you're trying to have, you may be having the story. Your
Mhm.
idea in Jira, or you are having different format
Mhm.
using it. But if you're not having the conversation around it, then it's not a story, anyways. So that's
Exactly, exactly. If the whole idea behind the story is start talking, start
absolutely.
talking, because last time in my video I mentioned one thing. We have entered a world which is called social. Social, a very important part of it. Social media, social. So this story creates that social thing that you have the opportunity to tell a story, and a story is also a very nice way of communicating ideas, right?
Mhm.
If you want to communicate some idea, if you tell in the story form, for example, whatever I'm saying, if I tell you the story behind it, like why I did it, then you will relate to the story more, relate to the real thing more. And there's a word that goes around that says like words make you think, stories make you link. So
Yeah.
when you have stories, then it link the people together, right? And that's the whole idea behind the stories, that it links people.
People remember those conversations as well. So that is
Yes.
also important point. So moving ahead, actually, so another point which generally comes up from story standpoint, and which continue to confuse people. I mean, at, at least it confuses a lot to the developers, where people say that user stories should have the value.
Yep.
Now, the question generally comes up is what is value? Because I mean, generally from for a development team, whatever is coming from the product owner's mouth is a value, fine, because they are not there to validate what is really happening somewhere. So I think uh, it will be important to understand here, like what exactly is value, and what is, I mean, when, and we can extend it to the business value as well. So what do you think around that?
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of people talk about the value, the customer value, business value. So let me tell you one thing about the value. And there's another word that comes later we'll discuss as well, value and the viability. So
Absolutely.
the value is, so for example, I create a product and nobody uses the product. I create a website and not even a single person visited their website. What is the value of the website? Zero, because nobody is using it. So the value comes when a customer uses the product. So for example, say I create a website and this website has nothing but just one click button. Nothing, just click button. You cannot do anything, just click. Does it have a value? Yes. If the customer comes and clicks the click button, just that one button, then at least you will know that how many customer came and clicked that button. So every time when you interact with a customer, so the value is actually created by the customer. The value is not created when you deliver a product, when you write a very nice story and deliver it into the production. The value comes when a customer uses the product, and the customer could be internal, external, doesn't matter. When they use the product, the value is generated, wealth is generated, right? Because either you're going to get data, or you're going to get a feedback, or you're going to get some money, right? When they buy the product. So either way, you will get something from the customer. And when the customer does give you something, that is the value, right? So the whole idea behind this agility is to be valuable. And when they say like we deliver business value, actually you don't deliver business value. You deliver something in the production, some product, and the
Yeah.
customer uses it to create a value for you, right?
Yeah.
And the reason it is important to think in terms of customer is because a lot of time you see, and this is one data, I don't know how accurate that is, but say 80% time or 84% time, the features were never used or
Yeah.
rarely used,
Yeah.
right? Even if it's rarely used, it's used once in a year, you have some value, right?
Yeah.
You'll of course question like why I'm creating a feature that is going to be used once in a year, but it's different, but at least used. Think about the features that was not even touched once by the customer. Why did you ever create it? It was a complete waste of time, money, and it made your system complex. It was never used. So that's the idea behind, that is the exact idea behind the thinking in terms of value, is like everything which I'm creating must be used by somebody. If people are not using it, it's of no value, right?
Yes, actually, before this conversation session, we were having a discussion about our video as well. So,
Yeah,
what if we think that we are creating a lot of value out of this video and we post it on YouTube, but nobody watches it, and why? Because I mean, from our standpoint. Uh, I mean, we are creating a lot of value. We are a lot of having a good some of the good ideas which people who are who are part of this live discussion
correct.
may be enjoying it. But when you go outside, uh, the same 1 hour discussion may be looking very heavy for a person actually. So even though in your standpoint it may be a value, but it has you have to start thinking empathize from the customer standpoint or user standpoint what he terms as a value, and it may be like he just wants to watch, for example, 5 minutes video.
Yeah,
He may not be interested in having a detailed video on some topics. So it's not just about uh, thinking that you are delivering some value, because at the end of the day it is just a guess, but
correct.
it has.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a very good example. So you create a value for 1 hour and you have a wonderful discussion and you give lots of tips and you get wonderful examples and all. And guess what? When people start watching that video, after 10 minutes, they lose their gas, right?
Yeah,
Okay, my God, I cannot go beyond that. It's not that it's not interesting or not useful. It's just that staying for 1 hour with a video is maybe too much, right? And they may not have that kind of a time. And think about this. You create a small videos of 5 minutes each on each individual topic, and people watch 50% of it. It still is much more valuable than not watching the whole thing and missing it. So what I say, when you try to make things smaller, and that very nicely segues into our story slicing, but
yeah,
when you try to make things small and smaller, and people uses it, you kind of incentivize people to use those small things. So basically you're using the value of that, whatever speech that you gave or the story that you created or whatever you did. If people are not watching it for whatever reason, either it's too big, it's too many, then it means that is not valuable. So the value does not come in my giving you some tips, giving you some ideas about the agility. The value comes when you actually listen to it and use it.
absolutely. It's a very, very wonderful point, actually. So I was just going towards the idea of viable versus valuable. So you just mentioned that you would like to cover that.
Yeah,
Let's try to understand what is viable and what is valuable,
yeah.
and what is the difference between these two.
Correct, correct. So a lot of time you will see there's a struggle when you're working with your team, and the people will come and say like, "Hey, if I just deliver this one particular functionality, for example, you're creating a website, you know, and mm, I remember I was creating one website for selling phones, and when you're selling phones, then I said like, let's start with one phone." And the people said like, why one phone? Nobody is going to buy one phone. And why not let's have all the phones together? So when you talk about the viability, just putting one phone is valuable on the site. However, if you really want to make it viable, you should give the opportunity to the customer to buy the phone. For that, you need at least one product. You need shipping address. You need billing mechanism so that they can pay, and then you can ship the product, right? So when you have everything lined up, then it becomes viable. So viability may take time, or you can do in a one iteration, absolutely. But the thing is, Your idea is always to go for the viability so that the customer can use it. But when you're creating a story, a story in itself may be viable or may not be, but it has to be valuable, right? So when you're splitting a story, you're split in, for example, you're creating a huge website for selling airline tickets. This is a big website, right? You have to do a lot of things. So now you're going to say is like, I cannot be even valuable until a lot of work is done. Okay. So you can slice your work in such a way that you just create a framework and try to get a feedback. Like, how does this look like? Do you like, you can go to your customer, you can go to your business, you can go to the users and say like, hey, this is the basic framework I've created. Can you just, or you're creating a report. So you don't have to create the whole report, just create a framework of the report and go to your users and say like, hey, do you like this framework? That's how it's going to be. That's how the report is going to look like. There is no data in it, right? And you start getting feedback. So like I said, the whole idea behind the story is to create that value, right? And the people, when the people are starting using your story to create wealth, to create value, then it becomes viable. So in that case, which I gave the example of selling a phone, even if you're selling one phone and people buy one phone and you can ship it to one address with one billing mechanism, that is viability. But just putting your book on the site and you're not selling it, you will see a lot of websites which is just one book. You can just read about it, but you cannot buy it. That's valuable, right? But I won't call that viable. The viable is when actually a whole entire chain of actions is done and it can be purchased or customer can use it viably. Then you call it viable. Make sense?
I think I just want to extend it further actually,
Mm-hmm.
where what generally happens is that people coming from the waterfall background maybe thinking little deep actually from a feature standpoint, that okay, let's cover this whole feature and then we will cover next feature, then we will cover next feature. uh, and in that sense, they may be having, okay, have we covered this whole epic? Because I mean, if you start thinking in that perspective, they are going too deep actually. And
Yeah.
so for example, I may be creating a login page for just 1 month and
Yeah.
delivering it, but it is, as you said, like it is not viable. Fine.
Yeah.
So and we may get into the depth of it, but it is not usable from the user standpoint.
Yeah.
So do you see that kind of challenges coming while people come from that background?
Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. So in this world, I've seen, and I've been to many companies, when they talk about the minimum viable product, actually that is maximum viable product. That's not minimum. The reason is they want to do a lot of things. And their simple idea is, unless the product is complete with certain number of features, it is not viable, or at least they cannot launch it, right? Good. But even if you have a certain number of features, say you're a corporation, you're AT&T, you're T-Mobile, or you're any big corporation, and you think that you have a customer base, and you cannot go to your customer base without having a robust feature because it doesn't gel very nicely with their brand or whatever reason, the enterprises think that way, but their product has to be robust enough because they reach the customer, right? Okay. Their thinking is good, and there is nothing wrong with that they need to have a robust feature before, and that should match with their brand before they can reach the customer. But this is not about not meeting that. This is about how we can reach there, right? You can reach there by take one portion of it. You can take one product catalog, and then you can put 10,000 phones there, right? And then you can create a shipping mechanism, a shopping cart, which is very complex. It calculates all kinds of things. Then you will have all kinds of shipping, this shipping, billing, and all those kind of detailed billing, 5 different kind of billing and all, the return mechanism. And plus you can add hundreds of features, and you have started working on each. The danger of going that way is, number one, when you go too deep into one feature, it becomes very hard to integrate with other feature. Okay, now I give a real life example. The people were working on automated caller, right? Automated caller is the phone dials to different people, and when it connects to the live agent, right? So that was kind of an automated dialer. And they're working on it, and they were creating a big architecture, and they were gathering all kinds of requirements. Again, I say requirement, but actually they were trying to understand is like, what is the business need? Tell us. And the business, I went and talked to the business, so like, even I don't know what is my need. If you ask me, I'll make it up and I'll give it to you. So most of the time, that's exactly what happens. Business comes up with, they mix up the requirements, or they mix up some story just because you ask them, and they give you, because the thing is their job to give you the requirement
Yeah.
or the stories, whatever you call it. The real idea behind when you're creating an automated caller is to maximize the usage of that automated caller. And the way to reach is start with a very simple system. So the way I suggested is like, there are various rules in various states of the US. So you start with those states where there are least number of rules, or where you think you're going to be most effective.
Yeah.
And start with just one that window where there is no regulations. You can call anybody, right? And then maybe you start with one state, and maybe you start between 12 and 3, and see if you're getting any response or not. Once you start getting response, then expand that window. And then you expand to more states, and then similarly stick to some window, and then expand the window, and then start incorporating their rules, their restrictions, regulations, and everything. And that is, the more you try to go and incorporate those, more complex your system is going to become. The difference is, ultimately, you're going to go and create that robust system, but you're creating based on the data that you get from the customer, and not in the silo and based on the assumed requirements. So you should always be in touch with the customer. You all should be connected to the customer. So when you are investing too deep in one area, basically what you're doing, you're thinking is called HIPPO, highest paid person's opinion. And the highest paid person is giving you the opinion, and you're implementing that opinion without even seeing the data, without any getting any kind of a customer input. If you did not get any customer input on any of the things that you're using, then the chances of your system being used diminishes over the period of time, because people may not like it. It can change, and they want something totally different, because you have not reached them, and you've already over-invested in the features, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So do not over-invest. And also, as a developer, as a person, if I do any work, I would like to see the results of that, because that is motivating. Like, so many people are using it. If I deliver a result and people say like, hey, nobody's using it, will I be motivated? Not at all, right? So business is not going to be motivated either if nobody uses the feature. So the way to go it is, whether it's an enterprise or a small company, when you're creating a feature, always go with the smallest slice first. So that is one part. And the second part, which I'm going to talk about, is equally important. As a developer or as a development team, when you're developing that feature, it's very easy to make your system complex and start on a complex system. The whole idea behind agility, remember the Gall's law, that complex system only evolves. You cannot create a complex system. If you try to create a complex system, it's not going to work. So it's very important that you create a very simple system. In one of our videos, I'll show you that how we create a simple system. But you create a very simple architecture with bare minimum, the smallest possible stories. And for example, I give an example of like books or a cell phone. If you want to sell books or cell phone, start with one. Think in terms of one. How I can sell one book or one cell phone across to one user, maybe, or maybe multiple users, doesn't matter. But one phone or one book, the importance of one is very important. And you start your architecture end to end, a viable product end to end based on that. That will help you make your story smaller and viable also across the board. So that is important.
So actually, now I'm coming to the idea of the slicing. So there are two two focal questions around that. One is, I mean, one can be from the perspective of a developer who is asking that for a long time I have been developing features which have been delivered in a couple of weeks or 3 weeks or a month, then all of a sudden you are asking me to slice the stories. Actually, I mean, first of all, why should we do it from a developer perspective? And then another question, which may be perspective again, this is a why slicing point again, which is coming from a product owner, that again he is coming from a waterfall background where the entire feature really goes to the production, and then he is really hell-bent to say that I don't I'm looking for this entire feature. And so again, why slicing? How do you convince that product owner in that perspective as well?
Exactly. That's a great question. And you will see this all the time in the workplaces. People say like, why you're slicing it? We have to get it done anyway,
Yes,
right? What's the
yes, yes. Yeah,
importance of it?
yeah, yeah.
So like I mentioned before, there are two parts of it. One is you can create a simple architecture, plus you can get the customer value, customer feedback. So I'm not going to repeat that. I've already talked about it. So those are very important parts of why we go and work small, so that we can reach the customer fast. That's the whole idea behind agility, is reach the customer fast to get the data. Once we get the data, then we will use those data to incorporate and prioritize our backlog and give exactly the right feature to the customer, to the user. So that is the idea behind the whole slicing and going small. But now come down to the developer's point of view. So there is a question is like, I can do this story, the whole story, in a month. If you slice it and you try to make it a smaller, it's going to take 1.5 months. Just an example, right? Because you're asking me to go and put the effort to slice it first, even the vertical slicing, and then you go and code on this. You like
Integrating.
test is, integrate it, refactor it, all these things is going to slow me down. So why are you asking me to become less efficient? So the answer to this question is, in this world of agility, what matters is effectiveness, not efficiency. We are not in the world of efficiency. So you can write the wrong thing and you can be very efficient, and you will be wrong and more wrong and more wrong, right? And instead, you start a small, you slice a story, reach the customer, get the data, and try to be right. So this humility is the fundamental of this agile software development. The humility to say that we do not know what exactly customer need, right? The
Absolutely.
humility to say that whatever we are developing may not be accepted by the user. The user doesn't want it. User may not like it, right? And once you start on that hypothesis, that I'm humble enough to understand that I do not know, and I'm exploring the world, how I'm going to reach the customer and try to understand, so that I'm closer to the truth. So the moment you have that humility, in that scenario, you will understand the importance of working small. So this is the first part, why you should work small. Be humble. Second, uh, say you have 5 members in the team, and if you take one big story and think you're busy for the rest of the iteration, and your other people are working on the story which is of secondary or tertiary importance. Let's say like in the backlog, prioritize backlog, you're working on the number one story that is going to take the whole iteration. And your fellow developers are working on a story that is going to take half iteration or the full iteration, doesn't matter. But that's number two priority. So what's going to happen is your entire story is going to be delivered, whether it's priority number one, priority number two, or three at the end of the iteration, maybe later, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But once you slice it and you work together, not just in the process of slicing, you're getting value in terms of you're uncovering a lot of unknowns, but also you're giving opportunity for other people to chime in. So if you slice one story, say, take that story, where we talked about selling one phone online. If you slice a story like, hey, I'm going to create a product catalog for one, I'm going to create a shipping, and I'm going to create a billing. You slice that in that fashion, and you all work together. Maybe you have 5 developers, you can further slice it, and you can work together. The chances of the entire viable product being ready in iteration is very high, versus one person working very deep into one area, right? So the whole idea behind slicing is the more developers can come together, they can swarm, they can mob, and they will, once they interact, that's the social part. Once they interact, so wonderful ideas will come
Absolutely.
together, and they can have some wonderful solutions for the customer, and they can reach the customer with more confidence versus one person going and just doing the whole thing with whatever no. And they can be the sharpest of the person, but the more minds when they come together, you will see a lot of those, what you call, the blind spots. Those blind spots will come on, and you can start visualizing things from the 360-degree angle, and the quality of a story will go up.
And at the same time, I think the stories will get done faster as well because
Yes, yes, yes. So
I mean,
that's a very important point which I raised.
yeah,
A lot of iterations you see, whether the story is very important or least important, they all get done at the same time and towards the end of the
yeah,
iteration, right?
yeah, yeah. And,
That's not how it should be. There is a reason the business is prioritized. If it's the number one feature, and this is the first thing that uh, the customer wants or customer needs, then in that case, the entire team must go and focus on that one and give the highest priority thing. And you need to do, for example, if you're studying for the exam and you study for 5, don't study for the 5 subjects together. You're going to study the most important thing that you're going to go and deliver, right? So it's something like that. Always think, when you're going to go and get the gold nuggets, do not focus on the silver at the same time. First focus on the gold. Once you uncover all the gold, then you go for the next most important one, as much as possible, realistically. Not just because one story is the highest importance, the entire team must work on it, but think realistically that how many people can do it in the fastest way, right? How I can slice, so that, is it 2 enough, 3 enough, 4 enough? So be practical and then see, like, okay, the fastest I can achieve is in 3 days with 3 developers. Go for it. 1 developer, 7 days, and 3 developers, 3 days. 4 developers, still 3 days. So stick to 3 developers, right? And go and deliver that in 3 days. So that should be the idea. Another thing which is equally important in slicing is the story should not be too big, and also it should not be too small. If you make a story too small, like a 2-hour story or 4-hour story or 8-hour story, less than a day, then then it becomes a task, you know. So there is no harm in doing it. The small story, very small story, which is like 2-hour story or 3-hour story. The problem with that kind of a story is it takes away the whole conversation. It looks like it has just go and do it. The
yeah,
whole idea behind the story is the conversation. So the story should be ideally in the range of 2 to 3 days, so that it can strike some conversation and the people can come and give the ideas of doing it differently in a better way, so that you can come out with a quality solutions. So do not make your story too small either. Otherwise, it will just rob you of the entire precious conversation that you can have.
absolutely.
Mhm.
So actually, this question is more from the perspective of from the Kanban and Scrum actually. So people say that uh, that we are doing slicing because we are forced to work under time box. So we are working in under 2 weeks, and that's maybe the one of the reason you are asking us to slice it further. And uh, in in many cases, people also say that let's move to the Kanban as well, because it doesn't basically put any kind of time boxes pressure, and we can just focus on delivering the business value instead of worrying the time boxes. So, what are your thoughts around that point, actually?
Correct. Okay. Yeah, what I've seen is Kanban is task oriented. Scrum is very goal oriented,
Yeah,
and
and
as far as the
collaboration
stories,
is oriented as well.
yeah.
Yeah,
So as much as I think that way, I won't go into the discussion of Scrum and Kanban because it's going to go and distract it.
absolutely.
However, I'll talk about is, no matter what methodology, what framework you use, doesn't matter. What really matters is, are you getting the data or not from your customer? Are you developing in such a way that will speed up your ability to reach the customer and get the data? And why? Because They are the one who is going to create it. You are creating a product for them. You're not creating a product for yourself, right? And
Yes.
you should create a product which, uh, that reminds me, one time I went to a tailor shop and the tailor was telling me that what I should wear, right? And I went with a, it was like a coat, and the coat, the length of the sleeve was kind of a smaller, and say like, no, 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 that's how the people wear nowadays. So if the teller is telling me what I should wear, then that's a very difficult thing, right? Because I'm the customer. I need to decide what looks good at me, right? If I don't feel good, I'm not going to wear it. So similarly, when you get a story and whatever framework you're working on, and you do not reach your customer, and the customer validates it, yes, that's exactly what I need, doesn't matter what methodology you're using. So from that perspective, your story has to be small. It is in your favor to make your system usable. You make your system maintainable, you make your system extensible. And the only way to do that is you try to keep things small. The small is valuable. And in order to keep the thing small, you have to slice it. You have to deliberately slice it so that you always work in a small increments, and then create a I give an example of search. If I was working in Microsoft in one of those projects where they say, go and do all the searches, the keyword search, Boolean search, wildcard search, so there are all kinds of searches. So they gave the whole detailed requirements, go and do all the searches. The first question asked is like, well, how many users you're expecting in the first month? And they said 50. I'd say in the second month, maybe 10 more, 60. I say for 60 customer, you're going to do wildcard search and all those Boolean search and all detailed kind of searches. Why can't you just scroll up and down in the page and you can see all those 50, right? And at the most, if you want to do really a search functionality, just do a keyword search on the customer name or something on some one of the fields, right? Is
Absolutely.
that not enough? Why do you want to go all in the detail of the search and make your system complex? When you're expecting a 10,000 customer, maybe 2 years from now. So 2 years now, you have enough time to go and make your system complex. Why you're making system complex now, right? So that is the beauty of keeping things very small so that you deliver very small functionality that to collectively and get the value, the data out of it, and make it usable so that people use it. Don't just deliver because somebody asked you to deliver, right?
Actually, I just wanted to add one point on top of what you just said, that actual value is not you delivering it, but somebody is using it. And I was reading a book from Ash Moria, running Lean, and he was giving some example on the continuous deployment. And one of the idea was he was saying is that uh, there is no value before it goes to the production. So by the time it goes to the production and it starts generating some data, then you start getting the value. So we
Yeah,
want to get faster there, actually, to get to that value faster. And that's where we may be using continuous deployment, for example. So in that similar idea, actually, I mean, that may be the context for the continuous deployment, but that is an idea for the smaller stories as well. In case we have a smaller increment, we can go to this production faster and then can see whether the person is using the work or not, actually.
exactly. And another important point to that is, like I said, you have to be humble. You have to know that whatever you're delivering may not be used. The customer may not like it. A lot of great products have been created and they've become super successful, including Slack, not based on the original idea. When they went to the market, they interacted with the customer, they realized something else is going to be more successful. So that's called pivoting. So when you pivot, the only way you're going to pivot is based on the customer need, and you'll know the customer need only when you reach the customer. So if you reach the customer with a heavy baggage, then that's a sunk cost. So it's better you minimize it and reach your customer, your users, with that minimum, the real minimum, so that you get enough data. And if you have to pivot in the right direction, you pivot early and you become more successful. That's right.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
So this now actually we are getting into the idea of slicing,
Yeah.
uh, how part actually. So far, from my standpoint, I have looked up different ideas on slicing, and some of it has been mentioned on the micron sites as well. Which is called as a
Hmm.
spider,
Yeah.
SPIDDR concept.
Hmm.
Um, so all these ideas are already there, but interestingly, people continue to struggle while slicing as well. So they feel that I cannot think beyond how to slice it further.
Yeah.
But at the same time, what we have seen is that there is much more value in having small slices. And one of the things which I also believe is that in case you have smaller slices, then the predictability is very high as well, uh,
Yes.
because you know, like how you will be reaching to the goal, because you will be finishing those things faster. Uh, so the idea is that I want to have the stories which can be finished in couple of days, as you rightly
Yeah.
mentioned.
Hmm.
Uh, so what all I should think, what all I should do to basically uh, slice those.
Slice the stories. Okay. So there are many ways of slicing. There's so many ways of slicing, and slicing is, I would say, it's kind of an art. And this is the art just because a lot of time I remember I've been to different coaching assignments, and I have some fellow coaches, great coaches. When I say like, are you helping with the team with the slicing? And they say like, well, uh, I give them there is a nice spreadsheet from Agile for All, and they give the spreadsheet and ask the team to go and do themselves. And the team just looks at that and say like, I cannot do anything with that, right? Because they do not have any idea how they're going to go and slice it.
Yeah,
So that's what I'm saying is slicing is one of the things that all the coaches must definitely know, and they need to learn how to interact with it. And
absolutely.
like I said, it's a vast area. But what I'm going to do is I'll share a slide and I'll give you some important ways. Like I said, there's so many ways, the 100 ways you can do it. But
Yeah,
I'm going to mention some of the things, and especially those smells, the way you do not want to do it. You know,
absolutely. Yeah,
if you do not do that way, then what you're doing possibly is going to be right. And one critical point in the slicing, the when I start, give me any story in the world. And the first thing I start thinking the way I think in terms of slicing is, the first question I'm going to ask is like, what is the core? What is that you want to achieve? What is the core goal? The fundamental goal. So reach that fundamental goal right away. You know, the key. Uh, I want to sell a book. That is your core, right? And then you can start thinking in terms of like, what is that why? You know, the core thing. And the more you attach to the core, the easier it becomes to slice. Because now what you're trying to do is to meet that core. I give an example. I was in a company and they were delivering a billing system to different smaller companies who do not have their own billing system. And they can, so they can sell their product, but they will come to our platform for doing the billing. So the first question I asked is like, how you want to reach the customer? Oh, we have to create a big database. We have to create all the APIs, and we have to create all the different kinds of accounts, and the segregated accounts. And plus there will be different features from each of the customer, and we'll have to accommodate that. So good, that we are going to achieve it. But how you want to start? That's the key thing. So the first thing I suggested is like, think in terms of one customer, and all we have to do is to go and sell them the billing platform, right? So if they can do the billing for one customer, then possibly they can do it for more, right? So let's start there. So create one account, and then create one customer, and just get one CDR. CDR is called call detail records, which when they go and you roam, it creates in the switches and what you call the cell towers, one record, which will have your start time, end time, all the information that you need for the billing. So just get one CDR, one account, one customer, and just a simple database, not even a database, fat file, right? And you can go and save the entire thing and see whether it works end to end or not. Then the person says like, that's the whole project all about. I'm saying exactly. So just keep things simple and try to stick to the core and reach your customer within 15 days as possible, right? In 2 weeks. and see if that's the thing they want. Even if you're nothing, if you're just able to ping the system into any of their multiple systems, that's it. So that at least you have validated, like, that's how it's going to look like. Now you make it more complex. Now talk about more CDRs. Now talk about child accounts, more accounts, multiple functionalities. So gradually, so as you develop the system along with 10 other customers, you will not just be locally optimizing, you will be globally optimizing. Now your product is going to be more usable for more customers. If you just go and put all your so-called requirements and create a big system up front, it may be usable for one customer or two customers. It's not going to be usable for multiple customers, right? So that's exactly how you need to go and proceed. Think in terms of the core functionality first. What is the core of the core? And start with the core and expand gradually. Gradually make your architecture complex so that you can make changes at will whenever you want, versus you get stuck with your own architecture and making small changes take a lot of time. So with that, let me share that slide with you, and I'll tell you what are some of the smells in a story slicing that you should not do. And in that process, I'll also tell you, like, what is the right way of doing, right?
Sure. Absolutely.
Good. So let me share that.
Yeah.
Share the screen. Can you see my screen? No.
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. For some reason, I'm not able to share, but it's okay. Even if I'm not able to share, I can talk about it. Okay.
If you can send me the slide, and then I can share it from my side.
Okay.
I'm sending you the.
That's all right. That's all right. Let me talk about it. Okay. So first of all, the one thing you can see my picture, right? You can see myself, right?
Yes, I can see you.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. So first of all, one of the smells in this user story is using splitting the story along the process lines. Means design, code, test, document. You know. So a lot of people still go and say, like, hey, as a tester, I want to test this feature so that when the code is ready, I can test the system. What customer value does it have? Zero. Because you can do hundreds of testing and you think these are the tests the customer really want. They really want to have a quality product. But actually, you're not delivering anything with that story. There is no value in terms of customer. If you reach the customer and say, like, hey, I've tested your product like this, they say, like, okay, thank you. What's for me? Right? What can I do? So this is one example, splitting along the process line. The second is like splitting across the architecture lines, like database, middle tier, UI. This is very common. In most of the companies you go, which I've been to, they still go and split that way. This is a UI team. This is a middle tier API team, backend team, database team. And as a developer, I want to create a database table. And that's the story they write. It's not a story. And they call it a technical story. So I'll come to the technical story later. But if you are slicing in terms of database, middle tier in the UI, definitely you cannot reach your customer. You can do something, you can achieve something, but you have to go a long way before you can reach customer if you slice that way, right? You have to do entire database development, all the API development, all the UI development before you actually reach the customer. And by the time you reach the customer, what happens? The customer says, I'm not going to like the product. It's outdated. This is not the thing which I'm expecting, right? All those kind of wonderful things. Third is along the procedural lines. Like sometimes people have seen people writing a story, very complex story. Like as a customer, I need to create, save, edit, print, and email my item list so that I can update the list, validate the shipment against the printed list, and send the list to the right people. Well, if you want to put everything in one story, and then you try to do more like a spec. So a story is not a specification. Story is a smallest possible slice to drive a conversation around one point, one idea, so that you can finish and reach the customer to get the feedback if you're doing it right. In this case, if you want to create, you want to send an email, you want to know that, can you send an email to one person with some list, right? So if in order to validate that, you do not need to have all the features combined into that story. Just try to keep it small and try to keep that very unique value. Give a unique value to that customer so that you can reach them faster. The third is hard to understand the stories. So a lot of stories are written in such a way that it does make sense. For example, as a user, I would like to report on the product performance so that I can highlight profitable products and consider what to do about the products that is not successful. So basically what you're doing, you're putting your entire business idea in a story. The story is not the place to put your entire business idea. You can create a vision document or something and you can put you there. Here in this story, when you're creating and you want about the product performance, you straight say like, hey, I want to see that how many copies of this product have been sold, or how many items have been sold, and how many items sold in that order, so that I can go and see the product performance, right, of each of the product. So well, if you make your stories kind of without having any uh, without having any conclusion, without having any clear outcome, it becomes very difficult for the user to go and for the developers to go and develop that story. They will have 10,000 questions they're going to ask, like, hey, what do you mean by not successful? What do you mean by this is not profitable, right? So always try to keep things very simple and have one idea and a clear idea. Another point, and that is very important here, is about the spikes. You must have seen like, uh, uh, especially I've seen the companies I've been to, they create a lot of spikes, a lot of spikes. And basically what they do is turn the spikes into something like an analysis.
Yeah.
So they do a spike and they do the analysis in the name of a spike, right? That's not the purpose of the spike. The purpose of the spike is to reduce risk and uncertainty, right? And a spike should not be written as a, basically what you do when you create a spike, you borrow your time from the product owner and say like, hey, in order to deliver a successful story, I need to do some research. So I'm borrowing some time to do the research so that I can be faster, better, and more, I can deliver product faster, better, and more meaningfully. And every time when you create a spike, one thing that you need to understand is it must have a conclusion. Means you need to deliver something, no matter how small that is, along with a spike. A spike should not be just a kind of a research itself, a research with a conclusion in terms of software. So
Mhm.
I give an example. I was working for a company and they were trying to integrate at least 7, 8 systems, and they want to see whether it's going to work or not. So I say like, don't just do a empty research. When you do the research, at least ping the system. Whether if you send a ping, and even that's going to be static, like it's going to send the ping, does it grow from one system to the other system to the third to the fourth to fifth and sixth, seventh system? If it goes through all the system, you think it works, then it validates your assumption like, hey, your architecture, at least in the beginning, has the ability to be successful, right? So that's how you go and create your spikes with a definite conclusion, like I'm going to go and validate this hypothesis with this.
Yeah, what is
It
the
should not.
unknown? What is unknown actually, and what you want to validate with the spike?
Exactly, exactly. So there must be some element of software in that. It should not be empty. Just I'm going to go and do some research, right? Yeah. So that's a very important point. Another is user story smell is the technical stories. So, and a lot of people will not agree with me on this particular idea. However, I'm going to say there is nothing like a technical story. If there is a technical story, it means you have avoided refactoring your system for a long time.
Mhm.
That's why you're creating a technical stories,
Mhm.
right? And that the story cannot be a technical story, because everything that we do for the users, we customer. Even if we're upgrading a system, it's just like a version upgrade. We are doing it so that there is a better performance, more security, more features that you're going to get. You go for the Windows upgrade, you go for any kind of an upgrade. With every upgrade, you get some kind of a functional or non-functional features, right? And that's the reason you upgrade, so that you can provide more features to the people, to the customers, or your system becomes more secure, more usable, less downtime. So there is a definite benefit of to the customer behind that upgrade. If there is absolutely no benefit, why would you do that, right? That's a simple thing. So in the recent example, I saw that there's a there's a team, they're working on an application, and now they say like, hey, the application has become too big, and I need to slice this application into a smaller application so that I can deploy independently, each of those applications. So breaking a big application, a big monolith into a smaller application and deploying it, that is important, right? And that work was done as a technical story because they have not been doing all from the beginning. They started thinking when a big monolith has already been created. If they would have done upfront, they would not have needed this. But even now, when they want to do it as a part of a story. So this is the story, and I'm going to go, and my story is going to be very small in terms of the customer, but I'm going to do a lot of those technical work behind the scene to make sure that my system also gets refactored, and I create smaller applications behind the scene. So that way, there is no room for technical stories in my mind.
So
There may be some occasions. Yeah, go ahead.
So I have a couple of questions on that and this point of the technical story. So one point which comes into my mind is some of the infrastructural setup
Correct.
which is required to be done for the project. For example, I am setting up a continuous integration environment which is needs to be done for the project, but it is, I mean, it is not aligned to a functional part of anything actually, or it is not a refactoring or something like to be done.
Yeah.
Another scenario which generally happens is the when I'm creating the frameworks. So I'm part of the framework team, and I'm creating some of the features which are kind of technical in nature, which may not be having uh, any user which may be using it may be another technical framework which may be using that core itself, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So in those situations, don't you think that technical story, or I mean this kind of idea will be maybe.
Correct, correct. Yeah. I've seen a lot of those. So my first question is going to be why we are doing it.
Mhm,
What if we don't do that?
mhm,
What we are not going to get it, right? Say you're working on Kubernetes, or
yeah,
you're working on some kind of uh, you know, what you call some kind of technology that is very brand new, or maybe you're working on some kind of new new database that you want to go and incorporate or something like that.
yeah.
So
I
the
mean, for example, enterprise wide, we are trying to change this database from this to that actually.
correct, okay. So the question is, uh, there are two scenarios. One, you're already working with the user, and the second is you're starting afresh. So if you're starting new, then it's a totally different ballgame altogether. But say you're already working in an enterprise and there is already customers, and you want to change the whole database, right? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So the key thing here is, even we are doing an infrastructure upgrade or something, and like I said, there will be some scenarios, very kind of those very rare scenarios where doing some proof of concept, and those in terms of things where you have to validate whether it's going to fit in your system or not. So for that, you have a spike. But even in that spike, when you're doing an infrastructure upgrade, you should have some kind of an end result where, like I said, it should not just be seen as this is going to go to the customer all the time, but you should be able to get some feedback. Like if I integrate at least portion of it, one portion of it, is it going to work? Is it going to go work with my customers, with my users or not?
Mhm,
you know think of an example. You're going from on premises to cloud. You
mhm,
take one API and you try to validate that if I put one API on the cloud, with all the things, whatever the smallest piece, and now try to integrate with the users, maybe one user on the side, and see if it works with that system or not. And like I said, this story can take the whole iteration. But so long as you prove the hypothesis working with the user, even if single user is there, and then you develop. So 90% of your work is going to be on, you know, doing the technical work, and
Yeah.
maybe a very small portion that is going to go and validate. So all the time you have to do is to make sure that you are delivering some kind of a value to the user, right? And it works, or it may not work. And if it doesn't work, then we know that, hey, it didn't work. Then try more, try in a different way. But it should not be just an empty research, even in the infrastructure upgrade things. And like I said, some of them, some of the upgrades could be really big, and I totally understand it. And it's not confined to that small, what you call that you have to complete all the stories in 2 days.
Mm-hmm.
No, it can take longer, because depending on the need, depending on that, the research that you're going to do, if you're creating a very complex billing mechanism, yes, some of the research can take longer. But that's the guidance. Like all the time when you're doing the spike, even on infrastructure items, try to do in such a way that you can keep the scope finite and small enough so that you can validate, you can get some data. And once you get some data from the user, like, okay, that's how it looks like, then you can go and start building on that. And like I said, this differs, and there could be like a very small area where you actually, there is a no way that you can finish the work in less than 15 days or maybe 2 weeks. But I've seen that very rarely in those kind of a thing. It's possible. There could be possibility. There could be possibility, but it's absolutely impossible to split, because such a difficult kind of an upgrade that you just cannot do anything. But those are extremely rare.
Yeah.
But in majority of the cases, you will see like there is a way that you can split in such a way that you can reach the customer, you can reach the user and get the data. And the user could be internal, it's not necessarily external users, external customers.
That,
So that's my answer to that.
sure. You can continue the.
Okay. So another one is solution stories. And as a user, I want to right click the box to get all the edit option. So a lot of time I've seen the requirements come with a solution. If the requirements come with a solution, it's like just go and do it. We should never be in that mode that just go and do it. There is a developer, there is a whole team to think about the solutions. They're expert, they understand the system. And if you give them the solution, basically you're telling them, don't do anything, just follow it. And then that may not be the best thing for the system to do, because they have to maintain the system. They have to make the system scalable, maintainable. And if you give them a solution, then what is going to happen? The developer will think like, yes, that's exactly we have to go and develop. So that's the wrong way. So that's another smell. Do not give them solution. In this case, you don't tell them right click to edit. Let developer decide is hover on the story, on the field is good enough, or there's some other way, right? And they will give you the best solution because they are engineer, they're trained in that. Another one is the customer data is not captured. And this is a point which very few people actually raise, and I raise that a lot. When you are creating, always think in terms of customer. So as a user, I can complete my profile to enter the system, right? So you have to create a profile before you enter the system. Now, when you're doing this story, basically what you're trying to do is to track how many people have successfully logged in, or how many people have successfully created a profile, or unsuccessfully they're not able to create a profile. You need to capture the data so that you know whatever feature that you delivered is actually being used, is usable. Another one is like what user behavior can be measured to determine the success. For example, say the percent of users who are using this new feature. The task completion rate means how many tasks have been completed. The task, if you have given to the customer, like creating a profile is a task. The task completion rate, all those things must be measured. So if your user story somehow or the other does not capture, capturing the data means in the acceptance criteria does not include capturing the data from the customer, it's not complete. So your user story must be written in such a way and also spread in such a way that it should include capturing the data. If it is just like a bland story and it does not capture the data, so basically what you're saying is you're just delivering and you're not interested in the feedback from the customer. right? And that data could be not for each story, but for a lot of stories, because that's the whole idea behind the stories, to create a